Welcome, everyone, to Our Whole Lives Taking Flight. My name is Reverend Amy Johnson, and I serve as a minister for sexuality education and justice in the United Church of Christ. I'm joined here, as always, with my lovely Our Whole Lives sister and comrade in all things sex ed and faith, Melanie Davis.
Hi, I'm Dr. Melanie Davis. I am the Our Whole Lives Program Manager for the Unitarian Universalist Association. And today I am drinking out of my 25th anniversary Our Whole Lives mug. Dan, would you
Well,
like to introduce
oh,
yourself?
I
Oh,
go ahead, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Long. I'm a special ed administrator for Seattle Public Schools. I work with schools and communities to ensure special ed services are implemented in effective ways. And I also have the distinct pleasure and honor of being the brother of Reverend Amy Johnson. So I'm grateful to be here.
Thanks, Dan. So yeah, I was just going to say, Melanie and I are involved in the revisions of the third to make for the third edition of Our Whole Lives for grades 7 through 9, and we're just deep in that right now. And I know some of you probably out there today are field testing that material right now, and we're so grateful to you for that. And as part of that, in the second edition, there was a section included about a special education approach to our whole lives for kids with special needs. And as we were working on language and revising some of the verbiage and stuff, we got some feedback and about like, some of that information isn't really how isn't really current about how we deal with inclusion and accommodation. And I thought, gosh, who do I know who might know something about that and be able to chat with us about it. And so I did call my dear brother Dan, and as we were talking, I said, we need you on a webinar because of some of the amazing, I found it really just lovely, inclusive thoughts and approaches that are happening. So before we dive into that, and thank you, Dan, so much for being here today and taking time. I did want to start us off with a reading. We've used this one another time. It's just so rich and beautiful. It's from this book, Soft Words for Hard Days and Flesh to Disability Wisdom. And this is Dear Friend by Alicia Crosby that we use with permission. Is there a place for me? Is there a place for me at your table? Is the seat low enough to the ground to keep my pain-ridden body from aching and high tops not meant to accommodate me? Is the lighting bright enough for me to see what options are available to me, or should I prepare myself to awkwardly slip out my phone-based flashlight to illuminate the table? Will our companions make room for my presence? COVID not being over and me being immunocompromised means I rarely leave the house. I want to enjoy your company, but can only accept if they understand that masking and distancing are signs of community care, not personal constriction, both in our time together and our time apart. Can I navigate the space we share with ease, regardless of what kind of day I'm having? Are the surfaces beneath our feet unobstructed and smooth? Are there elevators taking us high and railings for us to hold on to? Tell me if I have options, friend. I'm asking because I want to know if there's a place for me with you, a place that will honor and protect me, that will make space for my disabled body and being, that will help me leave as well as I entered because the empathy, care, and community to be found there remember me. Is there a place for me at your table? I ask because the way this world disregards me means my yes to invitation is contingent on what your answers help me discern and know. So I just wanted to ground us in that before we jump into some ideas about accommodation and inclusion and how that looks in schools and what we might glean from that about running, our whole lives programs and ministries in local churches and youth rooms and things like that. So with volunteers. So
Yeah, I
yeah.
would invite people to listen through a lens of not only making your OWL workshop space inclusive, but also your parent orientations and any promotion that you do of your programs.
Yeah. So over to you, Dan. What do you
What's such a narrow topic? No, no, that was a beautiful reading. I really appreciate hearing that. I think the first thing that comes to mind too is, these are my thoughts. I do work for Seattle Public Schools, but these what I'm talking about today is my practice and my perspective, understanding that my perspective is different than a lot of other people's, and that I come with a lot of privilege and um yeah. So just want to say that first off. I think in talking with you, Amy, previously, and a little bit with you, Melanie, the thing that comes to mind is moving from the model of, like you said, like there are special ed accommodations that we can provide into this space, and moving from that into embedding those ideas just in the general curriculum, or how we, like curriculum, conversation, relationships. I think that one thing that comes to mind, one of the tools that we use a lot in Seattle Public Schools, and I think in a lot of other school districts, is, and it's one of these terms that's come up and it's been through a few cycles in education and public education, professional development, and that's the concept of universal design for learning. And I'm not sure how folks are familiar with that or not, but it originates from universal design and architecture. And so, like, how can we make the idea being generally, if we can create spaces, buildings, transportation, all these things in a way that gives people access, it helps everyone. It doesn't just help, like help, which is also sort of an ableist word in a way too. Like it allows more access. The first thing that comes to mind to me is when you're walking on the sidewalk and you get to the curb and you see the ramp up. Well, that ramp is, required now by ADA for public spaces. And yes, it helps people who have mobility issues. It also helps parents who have children in strollers. It also helps a child who has a bike and is walking down the street with a bike, and a myriad of other situations. And so the first thing that came to mind when I was talking with you all about coming today was that shift that you had mentioned, Amy, about like, we need, like we really need, and we really try. And it's very challenging to set aside that idea of, okay, well, this is a space and this is how we support these people, and then this is how we support these people. It's more about, yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to say too, so we in terms of our process, of how we do revisions and all that kind of thing, we are working really hard to make everything more inclusive. And I was leading a training recently, and somebody asked, like, well, why isn't there a sex and disability workshop in the new material? And I said, well, because we try a few reasons, right? Like, one, Melanie found out years ago that that is one of the most commonly removed workshops that people would just take out and say, we don't need that because nobody in our class has a disability. Which is, like, we're all temporarily able to the degree we are able-bodied anyway. We're gonna, as we age, we we lose some abilities in different ways. And other, there are people who have lived experience all the time. And so how can we create the curriculum so that our language and our activities are offering options that are more inclusive for folks that that we may not have thought of as at the table, right? In the reading before. And we're not perfect, right? So there's stuff we don't know, or we don't notice. And so we also have asked um, people who, like UCC Disability Ministries and other folks in the UA that work with disabilities, to read our material before it went out for field testing, to say where have we missed, what else needs to be in here. So just so you all know that, even, and we have privilege. There's still things we didn't notice. There's things that aren't going to work for every single person, but just wanting to let you know that there is a process and an intention behind what we're doing. And I think, Dan, the thing that really jumped out at me when we were talking originally was, I think, and I hope I'm getting this right, is what you said, which was something along the lines of, well, we're trying to work towards everybody who walks into a classroom or comes into a classroom. See, there you go. Everybody who comes into a classroom needs accommodations, some sort of accommodation. What are yours?
Right. I mean, I would say too, like, and again, I don't think there's anything wrong with the word accommodations necessarily, but in my world, it has a particular meaning. And so one of the things that I try to do in my work is, and I'm not saying accommodations is wrong. Maybe it is, maybe it's triggering for some people. But what I try to use more is like, okay, when a student comes in, thank you very much. When a student comes into a classroom, they need support. We all need support. And so what does that support look like? Because as a teacher or a facilitator, one of those responsibilities, I think, is for me or the people that I work with to take the responsibility of trying to figure out what that support needs. It shouldn't be, from my standpoint, it shouldn't be put on the person walking through the door, or again, coming through the door, catching myself there. It reminds me of other, and I think it is, it's tied to a lot of same perspectives that we talk about in other social justice areas, right? We're not going to be perfect. That's not an excuse, right? That's not an excuse to say like, oops, sorry, right? But if we're going to move, and I really appreciate how you said it, Amy, too, about becoming more inclusive, because it is a process. We're going to make mistakes. People are going to make mistakes. It's not going to be fully realized initially, maybe. But how do we do that? We have those difficult conversations. We bring in different perspectives, like you said, like you bring in those other support associations or organizations, in my case, community organizations, families, to get their perspective, instead of, which I think still happens a lot in public education and in education across the board, where the person in the position of power is making some sort of an assumption of what the person that they're working with needs, instead of engaging in a conversation with the person to find out what they need, because those quite possibly and often are two different things.
One of the things that I have heard over the years from facilitators is sometimes they have some experience in assessing. They've been teachers or psychologists or social workers, so they have some experience in assessing, and they believe that a child in their program might be on the spectrum or having a learning disability or something. And I have to tell them, so it's not your job to diagnose within this context, but you can talk to the parents about what works at school. And how can we maybe incorporate that into the OWL setting? because it's tempting, you know, to want to, because if you think you can diagnose this child, then you think what the solutions are that would work for that child, but that child may have entirely different solutions that work for them. And sometimes the parents aren't thinking that their child needs any kind of accommodation. And we don't necessarily want to be the people to say your kid needs this,
Sure.
you know, but asking how can we support your child? How does your child get supported at home? I think that that can be a helpful rephrase.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And that makes me think of, oh, I'm trying to hold on to it because I've got so many thoughts going through my head. The idea that what is the responsibility of a facilitator or a teacher or an IEP case manager? What is the role of a diagnosis, right? In education, there's a specific purpose for a diagnosis, right? A diagnosis helps us determine that we, like we need to go through that process with a family to determine and identify a category of disability so that they can be, so they have access to special education services. And there we go again, like even that is a separation, right? But I am very familiar with what you're saying, Melanie, too, because I do it too, right? Like, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I've been doing this for 17, 18 years. Oh, I see, like but it's an assumption. It's like those moments, I think, are where the assumptions happen and where the bias can come in. And I think, like you said, it's also just the opportunity to reach out to the family, to reach out to the actual participant.
Yeah.
And say, hey, I don't think there's anything necessarily, wrong with engaging with a student or a participant and saying, hey, I'm seeing that you might be struggling with something. Is that true? One, because maybe it's not.
Right.
Maybe they just need to look over here in order to stay engaged, right? Maybe they need to be doodling. I know I do, to stay engaged. So that initial question, I love what you're saying, Melanie, too, about like the parents. I mean, I think it's also too, like, depending on the age of the student. But I also think that one of the things that I know I do and that I see a lot is as students get younger, the assumption that they don't have agency becomes greater, especially when a disability is in the conversation. And I think that can be very harmful. And I also think it speaks back to what you were saying in terms of the assumptions that we're making, right? By saying, hey, wow, I know I'm a professional. And yes, you do have expertise. Not, like that, both things apply, right? I have expertise and I don't know for sure, right? And so one of the things that we talk about with our teams, our school teams, especially younger teachers of younger students, maybe even pre-K, and we're talking about situations with students that might have a lot of complex needs already at the age of 4, at the age of 5, at the age of 6, is decisions we're making now will affect that student and their family for the rest of their academic life, if not the rest of their lives. And that we go back and forth too. Like, I'm not trying to be melodramatic, but it's really true.
No, it is true. And I think, one of the things that we talk about a lot in our whole lives is, and when people go through trainings, is we talk about the music, the foundational pieces of our whole lives, and the idea that, the kids aren't as wonderful as our curriculum is, and as comprehensive as it is. They're not going to remember every single thing we say. They're not going to remember every activity we do. I mean, God knows I've been doing it for 20 years and I don't remember every single activity we've done.
Right.
They will remember the way it makes them feel. If they felt welcome, if they felt included, if they felt supported, they will remember that.
100%. And shout out to Maya Angelou for that paraphrase of that quote, I'll just say. No, I think you're exactly right. And and that's something we see a lot of too, is students and families that get really disheartened about their academic experience and their community experience at school sometimes, right? And so we don't, that's obviously a work in progress and always will be, I think. And I think if I'm talking to teachers or facilitators in this case, or community members, or even parents as well, it's I mean, I think, what am I trying to say? It's a process, and we have to, like, if we are expecting and want people to be engaged in what we are presenting and facilitating and teaching, we need to model that engagement with them. Does that make sense? Like it's a two-way street. Like, we have to have that communication. We have to build that relationship. I was thinking about this last night. Like, I'm not super schooled on like how many sessions and everything that you all do in your curriculum, but I assume it's different than teaching a year of third grade, right? Like,
Yeah, so like the kindergarten sessions are an hour long. The sessions for fourth graders are 75 minutes long. Those don't really fit into typical academic settings.
right.
They're So it is different than schools, and also the facilitators aren't seeing people on a daily basis.
Right.
You're seeing people once a week, or maybe for 2 sessions or something on a weekend. So it's a little different because there is that distance when you're facilitating.
Yeah, and some people might know their facilitators because they've been to church with them for a while, and other people might not. So, and there's a question again, and Andrea just put it in the chat too, to remind, please use a Q&A feature for questions. It's really hard for us to monitor all the questions in the chat, though I do see yours, Melissa, which is asking for some more information about best practices or how to work with middle schoolers and how to implement these ideas of support for everyone. So
where did I just put it? Yeah. Really quickly, and thank you, Melissa, for that question. And Melanie, that's why I was asking, because because I do think the foundational thing to me about teaching and working with other people in an educational setting is relationships. We have to build relationships and partnerships and equitable partnerships with the people we're working with. And that is difficult if you're not seeing them 4 or 5 times a day or a week, right? For 9 months. You're not developing a relationship over years in the same way, right? I think it's still possible, right? I think it's still doable. But it just takes a different form, and there are different ways to do that, whether you're engaging in, like, maybe if it's only an hour per session, like how do you build in relationship building into an hour, right? When you have, like, it's the well, I want to do this, but I got to get through this curriculum, the age
I
old
wonder
question.
if it would help, Dan, if people spend some, like when COVID happened, the lockdown happened, we encouraged people to focus on doing online, but not trying to teach OWL the way everybody always teaches OWL, but focusing more on that part of conversation and safety and, a little bit of sex ed stuff, but mostly community building. Because kids were often doing schoolwork online, and we didn't want to force them to do so much.
Right.
I think one of the maybe the lesson that we could use from that, and tell me if this makes sense, would be, rather than dive right into content, if people gather their program participants together for some social time for a couple weeks before they start their OWL program, and then that would help the young people learn how each other communicate, and the facilitators could learn something about the ways that the participants might need support. Would that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And if you have the ability to take that time,
Yeah.
I fully
Yeah,
endorse
and I think,
that 100%.
it
Yeah.
depends. Yeah, it just depends on where our whole lives is being offered. I think because some people are offering it in a faith community where the youth all know each other, right? They are already
Right.
in youth group together, or they are already doing religious education together in some way. So, or many of them are, right? So that might already be there in some ways. But oftentimes when people are talking about inviting others to their L program or opening it up to the community or partnering with another church, right? I'm always saying, so don't just like expect that you're gonna just get people to come to sex ed, right? Like, like have a
Right.
social thing first so that everyone can get to know each other and then work on partnering around our whole lives. So
Right.
To Melissa's question, you had mentioned earlier, that might be saying something like, I see that you're struggling a little, or I think that you might be. Is that true? How might some of those conversations look? Like, do you wait until you see somebody struggling, or up front, how do you invite those conversations?
I think, I think either approach can work. I think we have to be very careful about um, trying to have that conversation one-on-one with a person in a classroom setting of some sort, right? Because that can be othering and sort of exclusionary in a way. But if you have a relationship and you've done the work leading up to that, that might be a strategy, right? So I think what comes to mind to me is um, norms and commitments, right? Like these are the norms. I mean, we talk about routines and procedures a lot, right? But these are the norms and the commitments that we will be making in this classroom. I think that's a great way to start an educational experience, right? Whether it's in a
yeah,
classroom
yeah.
or something like this, because it immediately brings the participant's voice into the conversation.
Hmm.
It's saying from the beginning, this is our classroom, this is our space, so we need to move through this process to figure out how we're going to work together. And that
Yeah,
would include, when you're struggling, what works for you. Because one of the things that I see a lot in classrooms from very, very well-intentioned folks, and I'm sure I've done it too, is the idea of just saying out, like, here's a space where failure is okay. And like, it's okay to mess up and everything like that, which is great in a way, but in another way, it ignores people's experience outside of that space. So if we have folks that are coming in where it hasn't been safe to make a mistake, like we need to work through that to begin with. So that would be my first thing. I think it's also just a great way to get to know everybody.
We,
yeah. We do recommend having a covenant or ground rules
yeah.
that is created with the group,
Mhm.
or with the really young kids where
Well,
we.
and I think, yeah, the other thing that comes to mind too, really quickly, pardon me if I interrupted, but it's also it reminds me of, like you were saying, like, hey, we're in the first 5 minutes of the first session, let's just dive in. It's like, well, folks need to be in a space to learn. They need to be able to check in with themselves and be in a, I mean, we all do, right? And so if they're not in that space, right? If they're not in a trusted space where they feel heard, a warm and welcoming environment, we talk about that a lot in our work, the chances of them learning go down.
Yeah.
And that's not students with categorized disabilities. That's everybody. That's
Anybody.
me. That's
Yeah.
you, right? Like, and so we talk about a lot about the difference between engagement and engagement and learning, right?
Mm.
So you need to build engagement, I think, before you build engagement and learning. So that icebreaker, that getting to know, activity about building the covenant and everything, that helps people get into a space, or can help folks get into a space where it's like, okay, now I feel like I can be in a space where I can learn. And I think that that might look different in terms of what age you're working with, but it's the same concept.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we do have, yeah, as Amy said, we do have a group covenanting process. The first time the group meets to start their OWL program, and then it can be referenced. Again, we suggest that people post it. We did a while back a program about inclusion of autistic participants. And our guests were OWL trainers with experience with autism. And one of the things that came out of that was the suggestion that you be really specific about, like, if you have somebody who's autistic in the room and they need to stim, then your group covenant can say, you want to fidget, you want to move, you can do that. This is a safe space. But one of the things that Raymond also said was, it's the person who's autistic needs to know that they're not having to mask, like they don't have to worry about offending or distracting the other people. So it should also say that it's everybody's responsibility to say, if that stimming gets too distracting, I will,
Sure,
this is what I'm going to do. And everybody agrees on that. And I thought that that was really enlightening to be that open and honest about what the needs are as a covenant, that you're working in this group, and that it's okay if you need to do something to help you participate in the room.
right. No, you were gonna say something?
You go ahead,
Sorry.
and I was going to say something about that failure piece. So, but I can say that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think, no, I completely agree with you, Melanie. I think that a covenant means, to me, a covenant includes everyone in the classroom, right? And so, again, back to that first question of, a student comes into a classroom, what support do they need? It's going to look different. The one student might need to get up and walk around, and another student might find that distracting after a certain point. And I think the middle ground is, or can be, hey, just having that conversation, like, hey, we all need different support, and it's going to look different. So it doesn't mean, because I think what also happens is, even, again, well-intentioned, like, okay, we're going to have a covenant where it's okay to stand and move around, and that's it. Okay, well, is that inclusive after a certain point? Because it is in and of itself, because that also is, it's still putting focus on the student, in this case, like you were talking about, with autism, who might need that support, as opposed to, hey, we need support. How do you, when you're stressed out, what do you do? When you're stressed out, what do you do? When I'm stressed out, I tap my fingers or whatever, and having that conversation, so that not only, is everybody's needs being met, hopefully, everybody's understanding each other. It's not perfect necessarily, but there are those mechanisms then to say, like, okay, now this is getting distracting to me. Now what do I do?
Yeah.
Right. And what do I do that keeps the dignity for myself and everyone else in the building, or in the classroom, or in the space?
Yeah.
And so I just think it's part of that covenant. And it's like we were talking, I think, before, a little bit, like the level of explicitness sometimes can get pretty explicit, right? Like, you need to be explicit, like, okay, we're not saying you're bad because you have to stem, or you might need to take a break and go get a drink of water, but we do have expectations of a classroom, and we want you to learn. So how is that going to affect you learning? Oh, is it going to make you be able to learn more? Okay, well, that's different than if you need a break so that you can reset. So that's what comes to mind a little bit. But I think that's a really, really good point about, it's not just about, because again, it's not just about the student or the participant with the disability. It's about everybody. It's about the whole community.
Yeah, and I think just to tag on that and going back to that, like, here's a place where it's okay to fail, right? I think sometimes we we need to hear that too, as the
Oh
adults.
yeah, 100%.
Because I see and I know my own journey, right? Like and as a person of faith, um, I say to myself, "Let God has an amazing sense of humor," because anytime when I'm like, oh, I need to learn more about disability justice, then what happens is I get to like screw up all over the place,
Mhm.
right? I am just like I'm using language, I do that thing where I become conscious of ways that I am not meeting the
Yeah.
standard that I wish I were. And I have to be able to not make it about me, right? Like in a
Mhm.
group, like to be able to go, oh, sorry, I used the word see and there's a visually impaired person here. That's not what I apologize. What I meant was you
Mhm.
be able to access that. You know, like I have to be able to do that and not have my fragility make it all about me trying to learn better. I have to do that work
Right, right,
somewhere else, right?
right.
So I hear that a lot. Like people are afraid to try to be more inclusive, afraid to try new things, to implement more support for more people because they're afraid they're not going to do it right, or because they tried once and it didn't go well. And so forget it. I'm not going to do that anymore because ouch, right? So I
Mhm.
think that those of us with privilege really it's important to be aware of that, really, really aware of that, and get
Yeah,
our support somewhere else so we can go and be there for the youth and the people that we're facilitating with.
right. No, I agree with that 100%. And we talk about a very similar thing, right? Like what's, like I'm makes me think of the work I'm in now and come up with a barrier or an issue or a problem. And we think, okay, well now, okay, if we're going to be more inclusive or we're going to figure out what this family needs, we need to start here. We need to start with like, like whatever, like how to keep them engaged in class. Okay. Well, actually, no, maybe we need to start back about like, okay, well, how is the student getting to the door? Are there are there supports that the family needs? What are the communication? Okay. Well, actually, now we need to, and it always goes back to beliefs to me. It always gets back to your individual beliefs and how you then, because it shapes us, right? You talk about failure. Failure is a subjective term in a lot of ways, right? Like, yes, maybe we have, depending on the community we come from, we have a general understanding of what we all think is failure, but we're bringing our own experience to that. And these terms, it's very easy, I think, to use terms that I see as subjective as being objective, right?
Mm.
And so that's part of it to
Give
me.
us some
It's like,
examples.
well, well, failure, right? Like, there's like, is it I saw this something the other day where somebody was talking about like, yeah, we fail, but you're not a failure, right?
Mhm.
Like we make mistakes, but that doesn't mean that we fail. I think I think how I see that in classrooms sometimes are um, engaging with a student that might be, and I mean it's so. I'm trying to think now in the context of your curriculum too, which is
Yeah.
different, right? Like I don't know, like is
Well,
there a
sometimes, I mean, an example, so sometimes people think that, there's a question box at the end of the most of the workshops or for the older children. And the facilitators have a week to come up with an answer. So they have a little research time, but within a workshop in real time, questions can come up and facilitators like, shoot, I don't know. And then they get embarrassed that they don't know. And
right,
that's not failure.
right,
It's perfectly okay to say, I'm going to look that up for you
Yeah.
because, I just don't have that in my brain right now.
yeah,
That's a success to me if you can model that you don't have to pretend to be a know-it-all.
exactly, exactly. Sorry to interrupt. No, but I think that's a perfect example because you are modeling, you're being honest and transparent. You're not trying to fill a space with something that you're trying to figure out that you might not have a clear understanding of how you feel about it. And so like you're saying, Amy, too, like I think those are the points where, you know, like you say, Melanie, like I don't know the answer right now, but this is what I can do, right? Like
Yeah.
I can take some time to figure it out, and I can, you know, re-engage however we can, whether it's the next session or something like that. And that's the commitment I can make. So it becomes a continuation of the conversation instead of the end of a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Like, okay, well, I need to get the answer to this person. I'm not sure. So I'm going to say this. That can be harmful. It can be, you know, it can be just vague. It can be confusing, all of these things. And so I think those of us who are teachers and facilitators put a lot of pressure on ourselves and bring a lot of subjectivity into that as well. Like we are teachers and facilitators based on our experience as students and participants. And so we just, I think part of it is being aware of that and finding that community outside of or in conjunction with the community of the classroom to know, okay, this is something I can talk with my classroom about. And this is something I really should find some other support
Yes. And we
over
have,
here and then bring it back.
right.
Yeah.
And so some congregations or organizations that use Our Whole Lives might have a team of folks that they
Yeah.
can go to. And others might really make use of our listservs that we have
Mhm.
that they can ask questions. And those are periodically more active than others, often like certain times of the year when programs are starting or in the middle of
Right.
programs, like it may be in the fall or after the new year, like we'll see more activity on those. But I think to this point, I did a bunch of work with a lovely human named Jean Ilsley Clark many, many years ago. And she used to talk about human beings versus human doings. And I think that
Mhm.
that to your point of like, we make mistakes, but we're not a failure, or we fail sometimes, but we're not a failure, is that differentiation between what we do and who we are. And I think that
Mhm.
is really hard for a lot of
Oh
us.
yeah.
And especially in this culture in the United States, where so much value is placed on and definitions of what success is and what a successful life is has to do with is what people do, right?
Mhm.
So having that distinction in our heads, not only for the people that we're facilitating with, but also ourselves. I also just wanted to say, because sometimes there are tender topics that come up in sexuality education, right?
I
And so
imagine
the idea of
so.
like,
Yeah.
what should I say? What should I not say? I think it's not a terrible idea to really think through that with the question
Mhm.
box and like, how do you want to answer that in age appropriate way? And I also see and have seen, like Melanie and I were talking earlier, like, we've been doing this for a minute. So there's things that we've seen, over time that are sort of trends. And one thing that I see, and I think particularly in faith organizations, and particularly I'll speak even from the Christian faith organization perspective, progressive Christian faith organizations even, right? Is people get so excited because this is such a transformative, life-saving, life-giving, sex positive, oh my gosh, we have this with our faith. It's so amazing that sometimes the idea of parameters around what would be the best thing to say or not say, sometimes people feel like, oh, we just shouldn't have any because it's okay to talk about everything now. And so because we just don't do that well in our society at all. We either there tends to be either a don't talk about it at all. There's even a group of the sexual risk avoidance folks who are like, don't even think about sexuality, honestly. Um, to, oh, we just can say anything and do anything. And there are guardrails like for
Mhm.
what is appropriate for 5 to 7 year olds, what's appropriate for 9 to 12 year olds, what's appropriate for young teens, what's appropriate for older teens. Not to say like they shouldn't ask questions, but what we say when we answer them, there are some things that are important for us to think about in terms of boundaries. And that's one of the reasons
Well,
we say our trainings are so important.
I think
Mhm.
also we can bump up against parents and guardians' expectations. And I'm thinking of participants who might be young, who might have developmental disabilities, or might be neurodivergent, and their parents are like, I don't want my child thinking about that. Why are they asking those questions? And that's that area of helping that's why parent orientations are so important, but also
Yep.
ongoing communication with the parents, because we know that those children are sexual beings. They, and their parents might not want to think of them that way, but everybody has a body and everybody has responses of some sort, and everybody deserves to have information about their bodies and their feelings. And so the facilitators may have to do a little bit of extra communication with those parents, and try to do what's best for the child,
Mhm.
as opposed to managing the emotions too much of the parents. I'd like to, there is a question in the question box that I'm hoping that you can answer, because you use the word, that we bring our own values and what to this work. The question is, this person is wanting to offer Our Whole Lives in a Catholic school settings and be inclusive, but because it's a private school, they're being told, we don't have to do that. We don't have to do IEPs. So, the value of inclusion isn't there. So how can we help this person work in that setting?
Wow, that's a deep question. I think it, like you said, to me it goes back to beliefs, and I think, and I am not Catholic, full disclosure. Um, I I I do think, I wonder if there are avenues and places within that environment to have conversations about inclusivity around these topics. I don't know. That's a really tough question. I think,
I mean, and maybe it's not. I don't want to throw the Catholic school under the bus, because
no, no,
it's not limited to the Catholic school. It could be
sure,
any organization that
sure.
doesn't value
Thank you for
inclusion.
saying that. Yeah. I think, um, what I'm reminded of, I was thinking of this when were talking before that you asked the question, where it's about, you know, the parent that wants, like, okay, no, I don't want my child to think that they have a disability, or whatever that discussion is. And that is sort of, to me, that's the shining place on the hill we all want to get to, right? Like, that's, hey, yes, I would love to be in a society and a world where none of that mattered and all of this was figured out. And the reality, at least from my perspective, is we're not there yet. So how do we get there? Yeah, there might, like, from the construct that we're doing in a class, and the curriculum building, yeah, we have covenants, we have expectations, we have everything, so that we can move towards it, right? Like you were saying earlier, Amy, like, we're moving towards more inclusivity. And I think that can be that I think that's a hard discussion to have in a lot of situations, because you're admitting that we're not where we want to be, and you're admitting that we're living in the soup of racism, ableism, misogyny, everything, transphobia, and we have to work within those. We don't have to work within those constructs, but that's the reality. And so how do we respond to it, and how do we influence to move away from those things? Um, those could be tough conversations in the context of the person who's asking that question. But I think one of the things that we talk about with a lot of teachers that I work with is, what do you have control of and what do you don't? And where are the areas that you have influence? And where are those things where you are okay with compromising, and where are the things that you're not?
Yeah.
And I think these are really deep beliefs that people have. I have my feelings about some of them. I'm sure people have feelings about some of my beliefs. So I think, and this is kind of, I've been thinking about this through the whole talk, is about the idea of reflection that we need to do as educators, decisions when we go into a space. So maybe that person is willing to say, hey, you know what? I really need to figure this out, and I'm not willing to not let this be part of the conversation, right? And that's great. And there are consequences to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I think you need to be aware of the consequences of that. And one of the things we talk a lot about in teacher training is, and this is a jargony word, so forgive me, but it's non-judgmental reflection. So your ability to reflect on what you're doing without immediately taking a metaphorical sledgehammer and beating yourself over the head because you didn't do it perfectly, or you stepped in it, or you made a mistake, or you offended somebody, but to use it constructively, to be able to go, okay, wow, yeah, that was a very exclusionary thing I just did. And that was hard. And I see that was harmful. And I'm hearing that it was harmful. Okay, well, how do I repair that?
Yeah.
To
I
then
think
move on.
I think also couldn't a teacher, I'm assuming that this person, they're facilitating, but within a school setting.
Sure.
Would it be allowable to make some support
Trying to have more inclusion in their classroom and more supports for more students? Is this a parent? Is
Right.
this just somebody like, I don't like Catholic schools because? So I think there's some
Sure.
pointing out, like we might have a different answer depending on what the role is. But yeah, but there's ways to accommodate or to provide support even if there isn't an IEP or a 504.
Oh yeah. No, I think to me that goes back to the covenant building and the relationship building and finding out what people need. Asking directly, not singling people out, but as part of the community building. Because then, and if I'm sorry if I'm being too general, I think, sorry, my mind is going like 1,000 miles an hour. I think that it kind of goes back to the universal design for learning for me, which is like, hey, what are the different ways that I can provide access for people that come into my space? Whether it's school, whether it's I'm a parent who's working with a school environment or with the facilitators. I also think it goes back to the belief of why you teach and why you facilitate, because there are different values around that. Some people teach because they think they have the knowledge and they want to disseminate it to somebody else. Some people think that I'm a facilitator, so I'm pulling it out, right? So there's those pieces as well. And when you're dealing with big institutions like public education or the Roman Catholic Church or any, mainstream religious organization, there are parameters. And so I believe that my job is to not just accept all the parameters, but to really wrestle with what I think is helpful and not, and to be able to influence it in a way I can.
Yeah.
But also then to say, what is my role?
Right. And yeah, and where there's some more information that's come in about this person was a former staff member and a parent at the school. And because I was going to tag on what you were saying, Dan, and say that, you know, and I've said this before for other things, like it may become, there may come a time, because we're not there yet. It may come a time where somebody has to choose, like, which is the most important thing to me here, because I have worked to try to have conversations with this institution. It's not working. What is the most, is it more important for me to have them be in this particular some places are and I don't know the whole story, but I do think it's unfortunate when, because I have seen it happen, when um school districts say, well, we don't have to provide that because we're a school, rather than wonder and be curious about what kind of supports could be offered
Mhm.
in a way that would, and in a Catholic school, for me, I'm like, to create the kingdom of God right here in our school.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think people have to not be afraid to use the language of the institution.
Yes.
What's your mission? What are your values? What are the ethics involved with ignoring a child's needs? I do want to leave time to get to there was another question of somebody who has to jump in as a substitute in the very last class of Our Whole Lives. And what I would suggest, is that some kind of introduction be made before you show up, so that the facilitators are saying, hey, in 2 weeks, so and so is going to be here and we're going to welcome them for the last session. And then the next week. So next week, when you come, we have a special guest who's going to be co-facilitating, so that there is some advanced introduction that can happen. And then I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, when you get there, hi, I know I'm stepping in. I haven't been here. But I'm happy to be here today with you. And then leave most of the facilitation up to the other person, because they've built that relationship that we've been talking about this past hour.
Yeah, and I would
You have
even
anything
say,
to
if you're
add?
doing it ahead, to do something like, say, so and so is going to be here in 2 weeks, and what question what are 3 questions you'd like to ask to know about them before they show up in the room? Like, what's their favorite ice cream?
Yeah,
What do they love to do in their free time, and what's the most recent movie they watch or something? I don't know, whatever. But
right.
like, what's their favorite social media channel? Whatever. I don't know, but like 3 things, and then like answer those questions for them, so that you're coming in with a little bit of humanity. And
Yeah,
I mean, you're human, but like you're
Yeah.
more than just a name of a person who's going to show up. Yeah.
And
yeah,
I
and
would
I think
say sorry, Dan, this
no,
person said, I'm worried about the children. And the thing is that children are used to having
You're going to be
substitute
fine.
teachers. They're used to having babysitters.
yeah.
They'll be fine.
They're going to be
Sorry, Dan, you
okay.
were going to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think that's spot on. I think it's, especially with younger kids, like giving them that heads up so they're not surprised, right? Right off the bat. I also think that question, those questions you mentioned, Amy, that'd be a great activity for the whole class to do, because then it gives the opportunity for that person to know, like, really, like, okay, well, I'm not only here, and you're not only finding out about me, but I'm finding out about you, and that's important, even if I'm going to be here for one class period,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
do like what you're saying too. Like, like, I'm the new person, I'm coming in, I'm doing this, and then my role as co-facilitator might be a little, farther back in the game, so to speak.
Yeah. And the person saying like the things on the last uh, uh, workshop are things about like sexual or communication with a sexual partner. I'm like, yeah, so you don't lead that one. You lead
Yeah.
more about self-care.
Right,
You
right.
do the reading.
Yeah, and do the
Yeah,
reading.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
We need to wrap this up. Dan, thank you
Ooh,
so much for being with us
Oh,
today.
yeah.
And we thank all of our listeners, viewers, observers, however you took this information in. We will not be having an owl taking flight next month, because that's when we meet with our owl trainers for professional development. In January, on the 7th of January, we will have another owl taking flight, and we'll be talking about the faith components that can be used with Our Whole Lives. So we hope to see you at noon ET on January 7th, when we return after the holidays.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you, Dan, again.
oh, thank you both. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to talk with you. I appreciate the conversation, and I do have resources I can share.
Yeah,
That
you'll
you
get
can get,
those in
because
the
I know we talked a lot about
follow-up
generalities, but
email, and
yep,
they'll be on the underneath the webinar when it goes up on our webinar list. So thank you.
perfect. Awesome. Thanks all.